Hey everyone, today I want to give you a very quick tip, one way to find out what kind of level of competition Etsy thinks you can handle. And it's based on the keyword traffic that you've been getting. So you do need to have some traffic, but even if you have a few keywords to look at, you can do this. Let's go over to Etsy and I'll show you in my vintage shop. Now, the reason that I'm using my vintage shop is it gets very little traffic. It's pretty new, and I am going to do a video about it because I pretty much ignore the shop. I'll show you how you can do this with a shop that has less competition. Once you get to a lot of sales, you can handle more competition. But if you're just starting out, you don't want to take tips from someone who's looking at stats for shops that are really active. Let's go and look in here. What you want to do is go to your stats in your shop dashboard. I would do this on desktop. It's just easier. The app is lacking. We'll just put it that way. And you want to scroll down to Etsy search and the Etsy app and other search pages. And these will give you some of the keywords that you were found for with these two traffic sources. The Etsy app includes searches from the Etsy app. So, this is both kind of the same thing, but it's just different traffic sources, but they are search terms that it'll give you search terms that people have typed in and have found your shop. So we'll start with Etsy search. We might not need to look at the app, but what you want to do is scroll down and find the search terms. Okay. So the first thing I see is that people are actually searching for my shop name. It's probably people who are in my Facebook group or have watched my YouTube channel and are looking for my vintage shop. But this is something that is good to know because then it's a brand search. They're not searching for a keyword. But on the other hand, it's not going to give you a whole lot of information about your competition levels. All right, so the first two are circus. I'm going to ignore that. Okay, that's not something that I'm interested in. What I want to see is what kind of traffic and competition is there for these terms. So we have vintage games, collectible vintage, bookshelf statue. Now, these are going to be the more search terms, but see, there's not very many people searching for this. It says for vintage games, only 2 people searched for that, but they found my shop. So I'm going to open up another window where I can search on Etsy, and we'll see what kind of competition there are for those keywords. All right, so I'm going to search for vintage games. Spell it correctly would be good. And we just want to see how many listings come up for that. So that's a lot. Okay, so this is interesting that my listing was found for this. That's strange. I would think, okay, see, there it is. I would say that this is probably an outlier, although it is right up at the top. And it could be because we're filtering for vintage, but there are other things that are coming up that don't look like they're vintage, but they could be, I don't know. It's games in the vintage category, but that's a lot of competition. This I would ignore. Okay. And the reason is that I know that this shop doesn't get that much traffic and it doesn't get that many sales. So I'm not going to start going after keywords that have that much competition. This is an outlier. This is something that you look at and you go, oh boy, I can compete on that level. No, you don't want to worry about that. So the more general keywords are probably not something that's going to give you accurate numbers. Just keep that in the top of your mind, that you were found for that. My guess would be that collectible vintage is going to be the same kind of thing. And I do want to take this out. See, it's filtering for vintage. If you put vintage in the first word of a search, it filters for vintage. So let's do collectible vintage. And that's 3.8 million results. Again, these are not, I'm not going to look for keywords with that many results. Okay. It's not something. And that's so general. This could be anything. This could be anything. So it's interesting that my shop was found for that, but I would say that is a curiosity. It's not something necessarily, see, I don't see my listings here at all. I think probably what this is Etsy testing the listing out, and it's showing it for some general keywords to see if people clicked on it. Maybe one person did, but I don't think that that's going to be a consistent thing for me, especially if it's 3.8 million results. Again, that's an outlier. It doesn't feel right. Okay, so bookshelf statue, let's look at that. And as you get more specific, you're going to find numbers that make more sense. Okay, this makes more sense to me. Now, okay, bookshelf statue, I've got 2 listings right up at the top, and it's 2,200 results, essentially 2,200 results. This makes more sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making a list, and I'm going to ignore those outliers. I can't compete with 3.8 million results. I'm not going to kid myself. So 2.2, let's make a list. So sit down and start making a list of the numbers that are coming up. It doesn't matter what the keyword is. You just want to look at the number. Okay, so let's go to the second page, sewing basket vintage. Okay, how many is that? 11.3 thousand. That's still kind of on the high side, but I see that my listing is right up here at the top. So that probably has something to do with people clicking on it or the word order in the titles and tags or whatever it is, but Etsy is showing that pretty well. So that's interesting. So I'm going to write down 11.3. That might be the high end. Okay, you want to kind of get an idea of the high end and the low end. Giant pencil. This is a weird keyword that comes up occasionally. And see, this is the kind of thing like this is not going to make me want to go and look for giant pencils to sell just because I'm found for that keyword. 1,075 results. So that makes sense. To me, that makes sense for a shop that doesn't have that many sales. And giant pencil is just a weird keyword. So it says that I was found for that. I know that I have like a big toy pencil or something in my shop. So I'm going to write that number down. Antique games. This is the same kind of thing. Wasn't it? Vintage games, antique games. This one might have more search. Oops, more competition. Okay, it changed the spelling. 41,000. I would write this down but I think I might make a note that it was one of the outliers because we had vintage games. Antique games is kind of the same thing, but the competition is a lot hot. I think this is lower than vintage games was. But anyway, I would write this down because I can see my listing is right up at the top. So it is showing up well. And this is competition is pretty high, but I would make a note of this keyword because it looks like my listing actually is placing pretty well. And this kind of validates the vintage games, even though I thought that was too high. Maybe that's something. And you know what? I have sold a few vintage games. So Etsy's probably giving my shop a little bit of credibility for that. So that could be okay. So make a note of that. Weird knickknack. Now, I love to put the word weird in the stuff in my vintage shop because I have a lot of weird random stuff. And for anybody that says people don't search that way, clearly they do because somebody typed that in. That is a weird knickknack. Somebody typed that into Etsy and they found my shop through it. So they do search that way. Don't ignore these words. Okay, so now we're back to 1,300 results and see, I don't even know what this thing is. Vintage, it looks like a dog. My husband said it's a dingo. I don't know. I've examined this thing. I don't know what it's supposed to be, but it's some kind of a dog-like animal. So I put weird dog figurine. Okay, that's okay. And I think 1,300 results, that's good. And you might want to keep track of the keywords just to see if there's any patterns, because it looks like that one and that's come up for 2 of the searches so far. So that's interesting. Now, this one, Royal Brand Cutlery Company, I wouldn't even bother looking this up because that's a really specific brand search. But you basically want to just go down and it looks like your sewing basket again. So I know it's probably that same listing. Chinese tea basket, probably the same thing. Board games vintage. Now, see, I'm starting to see a pattern with the games. So it could be that Etsy is thinking that my shop is relevant for old games. And I am going to do a video about relevance on my other channel that's going up this week. So watch for that. But if you start seeing the same types of keywords that you know belong to the same listings over and over, then maybe Etsy has assigned some authority to your shop for that type of product. So that's good to know. So you basically want to go through your keywords. You want to make a list of the competition that's coming up for each keyword. And you probably want to make a note of the keywords for the really high ones. And like I said, if you do see some that are coming through a lot, just in different ways to describe something, make a note of that, because that could be that Etsy is saying this shop has sold this thing before. And so we're going to show it in higher up in search results for that kind of product. And then if you're out looking for things, or if you're thinking of things to make, if you have a handmade shop, you can start making more things in that category because Etsy's already kind of giving you the signal that they like your shop for that type of keyword. So that's the way that I do it. And then what you do after that is when you're looking for keywords to use, you're doing your keyword research, try to stay in that range or maybe a little bit higher, because as Etsy gives your shop authority and your shop listing quality scores increase and your shop quality score increases, they're going to show you for things that have higher competition. But start low, start on the low end of what you're found for and work your way up. And that's kind of a good way to see where Etsy is putting you in that range. But you do want to go and kind of get rid of the super high ones, and the super low ones don't really tell you much, but just look to see where like on the bell curve. With the bell curve, there's always some at the very end, some at the very high, the very low, but most of the ones in the middle are going to fall within a certain range. So figure out what that range is, When you're looking for keywords, stay in that range and maybe a little bit higher. And that's going to help you be found easier in search when you're just starting out. Leave me any questions and I will talk to you later.